Breaking news: Supreme Court has just issued a unanimous decision, and it's sending shockwaves through America tonight. 9 justices, 1 voice. And together, they've delivered a message that's echoing across the nation. The Second Amendment still stands, and it may now be stronger than ever before. This isn't just another ruling. It's a historic moment that could reshape how every gun law in the country is interpreted from this day forward. What exactly did the court decide? Why did every single justice agree, in a time when America seems more divided than ever? Stay tuned, because this decision could redefine your rights, your freedoms, and the future of the Second Amendment itself. The case at the center of today's earth-shattering decision challenged a long-standing federal firearm restriction that many constitutional scholars, gun rights advocates, and everyday Americans argued directly violated the Second Amendment. For years, this restriction sat on the books, seemingly untouchable, defended by federal agencies and supported by those who believed that limiting access to certain firearms was a matter of public safety. But here's the thing. The Constitution doesn't have an asterisk. It doesn't say the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, unless the government really wants to. What triggered this case was a collision between federal overreach and individual liberty, a confrontation that had been brewing for years through lower courts, circuit splits, and passionate arguments on both sides. The legal battle wound its way through the federal court system, with some circuits upholding the restriction and others striking it down, creating a patchwork of conflicting standards across the country. Eventually, the Supreme Court had no choice but to step in and settle the question once and for all. And when they did, they didn't just issue a narrow, technical ruling. This wasn't a minor procedural correction or a footnote in legal history. This was a constitutional correction years in the making, a definitive statement that the government had crossed a line, and that line is drawn clearly in the Bill of Rights. Now, let's talk about why a 9-0 ruling matters so much, because in today's America, in today's Supreme Court, this is practically unheard of. Think about the last time you saw Congress agree on anything unanimously. Think about the last time you saw the media, social media, or even your own family agree completely on a political issue. It doesn't happen. And yet, here we are, with a Supreme Court that includes justices appointed by Trump, Obama, Bush, and even going back further, all coming together to say the same thing. When liberal and conservative justices all agree, when there isn't even a concurring opinion trying to soften the language or narrow the scope, it means something profound. It means the government went too far. It means the constitutional violation was so obvious, so egregious, that no justice, regardless of their judicial philosophy, could defend it. This unanimous decision carries a weight that goes beyond the legal analysis. It sends a message to lawmakers, to federal agencies, to activist judges, and to every American watching. The Constitution is not up for debate. It's not a suggestion. It's not a living document that can be twisted to fit the political winds of the moment. The court didn't just rule. It drew a line in the sand and said, this far, and no further. What did the court actually say? Let's break down the main holding in a way that makes sense, because the legal language can get dense, but the core principle is beautifully simple. The justices reaffirmed, in no uncertain terms, that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right protected by the Second Amendment, and it cannot be limited, restricted, or infringed upon by arbitrary federal or state policies that fail to meet constitutional scrutiny. The court applied the historical test established in the landmark Bruin decision, which requires the government to prove that any gun restriction is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. And guess what? The government couldn't do it. They couldn't point to a historical analog. They couldn't show that the Founding Fathers, or even lawmakers in the decades that followed, would have tolerated this kind of sweeping restriction. The court made it clear that such restrictions fail both the historical test and the constitutional standard, and therefore they are unconstitutional. Period. But here's where it gets even more significant. this ruling now sets a precedent that could wipe out several other restrictive laws still on the books across the country. We're talking about state-level bans, federal regulations, and local ordinances that have been challenged but never fully resolved. This decision just gave gun rights advocates the legal ammunition they need to take those fights to court and win. The immediate fallout from this decision has been nothing short of explosive. Within hours of the opinion being released, social media platforms lit up with reactions from every corner of the political spectrum. Gun owners and Second Amendment advocates celebrated in the streets, online, and in living rooms across America, calling this a once-in-a-generation victory for constitutional right. Meanwhile, anti-gun groups and progressive politicians sounded the alarm, warning that this decision would unleash chaos, that it would lead to more violence, and that it represented a dangerous step backward for public safety. But here's the reality. Multiple states are already reviewing their laws in light of this ruling, and legal experts are predicting that some jurisdictions will be forced to repeal existing bans or face immediate legal challenges that they simply cannot win. Attorneys general in red states are preparing to expand gun rights protections even further, while their counterparts in blue states are scrambling to figure out how to navigate this new legal landscape without running afoul of the Supreme Court. Official statements have been pouring in from governors, senators, advocacy organizations, and even law enforcement agencies, each trying to shape the narrative and prepare their constituents for what comes next. And let's be honest, this isn't the end of the debate. This is just the start of a nationwide showdown, a constitutional reckoning that will play out in courtrooms, legislatures, and the court of public opinion for years to come. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice isn't staying quiet. In fact, the DOJ's response to this ruling is going to be one of the most closely watched developments in the coming weeks and months. Despite the current administration's occasional claims of being supportive of the Second Amendment, insiders and legal analysts are already reporting that DOJ officials are exploring ways to limit the scope of this ruling, to find workarounds, or to reframe existing regulations in a way that they hope will survive future legal challenges. There's a deep skepticism among gun rights advocates about whether the federal government will genuinely respect this clear message from the Supreme Court, or whether they'll engage in what some are calling constitutional resistance. The DOJ has a history of defending gun control measures aggressively, and this unanimous rebuke from the highest court in the land puts them in an uncomfortable position. Do they accept the ruling and adjust their enforcement priorities accordingly? Or do they double down, looking for narrow interpretations and technical arguments to preserve as much of the regulatory framework as possible? Gun owners across the country are now watching closely, waiting to see if the DOJ will respect or resist this crystal-clear directive from 9 Supreme Court justices who all agreed that the government overstepped its bounds. So what does this mean for you, the everyday gun owner, the person who just wants to exercise their constitutional rights without jumping through endless hoops and facing arbitrary restrictions? Let me translate the legal jargon into real-world impact. This decision reaffirms that your right to own, carry, and use firearms for self-defense, for sport, for protection of your family and property, cannot be infringed by vague, politically motivated, or historically unsupported bans. It means that when a state or the federal government tries to restrict your access to certain types of firearms, certain magazines, or certain carry rights, they now bear a much heavier burden of proof. They have to show that such restrictions are consistent with America's long tradition of firearms regulation, and if they can't, those laws will fall. This is a victory not just for lawyers arguing in courtrooms, not just for advocacy groups with deep pockets and political connections, but for every single American who believes in the Bill of Rights, who believes that the Constitution means what it says, and who believes that individual liberty should not be sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. You now have a legal shield, a Supreme Court precedent that says your rights matter, and that shield is backed by the unanimous agreement of 9 justices. Beyond the courtroom, beyond the immediate legal implications, this decision will shape elections, policies, and the broader cultural conversation about freedom, safety, and the role of government in our lives for years to come. We're already seeing the political and cultural impact ripple outward. Blue states may double down, passing new laws that they hope will thread the needle between this Supreme Court ruling and their policy goals. Red states, on the other hand, may expand protections even further, creating sanctuaries for gun rights and explicitly rejecting any federal overreach. This creates a fascinating and tense dynamic in our federal system, a genuine clash between state and federal power, between competing visions of what the Second Amendment means in practice. And here's the thing, this legal clash could soon return to the Supreme Court. New cases are already being filed, new challenges are being mounted, and the next chapter of this constitutional battle is being written as we speak. The ruling has reignited the national debate over freedom versus safety, individual rights versus collective security, and the proper limits of government power. It's not just a legal issue anymore. It's a cultural flashpoint, a defining question of our time. And the Supreme Court just made it clear which side of that line the Constitution falls on. So what happens next? Buckle up, because the road ahead is going to be anything but smooth. Expect immediate legislative pushback from states and municipalities that disagree with this ruling. Expect new bills to be introduced, emergency appeals to be filed, and creative attempts to reframe what common-sense gun laws actually mean in light of this decision. There will be politicians who vow to fight this ruling with every tool at their disposal, and there will be advocacy groups that spend millions trying to shape public opinion and find sympathetic judges who might be willing to narrow the scope of the ruling in future cases. But here's the bottom line, and it's something every American needs to understand. For now, the highest court in the land has spoken, and the Second Amendment stands reaffirmed, clarified, and strengthened. This isn't just a procedural win or a technical victory. This is a turning point, a moment that historians will look back on as pivotal in the ongoing struggle to define and defend constitutional liberties in the 21st century. The legal landscape has shifted, the political calculus has changed, and the rights of millions of Americans have been vindicated by a unanimous Supreme Court. This is not just hope. This is real, tangible, historic change. A 9-0 ruling. A nation divided. And a Supreme Court that just made history. Let that sink in for a moment. In an era where we can barely agree on basic facts, where every issue seems to split us down the middle, 9 justices from across the ideological spectrum came together and said, "The Constitution is clear. The government overstep, and individual rights must be protected." This moment reminds us that freedom isn't given by politicians, it isn't granted by bureaucrats, and it isn't something that can be voted away by a slim majority. Freedom is defended, in courtrooms, in the public square, and by citizens who refuse to let their rights be eroded one regulation at a time. This Supreme Court decision is a powerful reminder that the Constitution still matters, that the Bill of Rights still has teeth, and that when the government goes too far, there is still a remedy, still a check, still a voice that can say, no further. If you care about the Second Amendment, if you care about constitutional rights, if you care about the future of liberty in America, then make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, because this decision is just the start of a new era for gun rights in America. The battle isn't over, but today, the Constitution won a major victory. And that's something every American should celebrate.